The gaslight flickers against blackened brick walls as church bells toll across London. The year is 1875, and beneath the grandeur of empire lies a different world entirely. A world where the air itself can kill you, where water carries death, and where being born poor is a crime punishable by slow suffering. Tonight, we journey past the romanticized tales of Sherlock Holmes into the real London, where children work 16-hour days in factories, where families share single rooms with strangers and vermin, and where the Thames runs black with human waste and poison. This is not the London of top hats and tea parties. This is where life expectancy in the slums hovers around 15 years, where breathing slowly dissolves your lungs, and where a single drop of water could sentence you to death by cholera. If you enjoy these journeys through history's darker corners, be sure to like and subscribe to Bedtime History. Now close your eyes and let us transport you to a London where survival was never guaranteed and where you wouldn't last a single day. Chapter 1: The Awakening. The rat scurrying across your face is what wakes you. Not gently, but with tiny claws that scratch at your cheek as it searches for crumbs in your unwashed hair. Your eyes open to complete darkness, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint orange glow seeping through the cracked walls from the gaslight in the alley below. The air hits your lungs like a physical blow, dense with coal smoke, human sweat, and the sweet, sick smell of decay that permeates everything in this part of London. You lie on what generously might be called a bed, though it's really just a collection of rags and straw piled in the corner of a room that measures perhaps 8 feet by 10. The straw pokes through the thin fabric, and you can feel things moving within it, things with too many legs that have made their homes in the bedding alongside you. Your blanket is a moth-eaten piece of wool that weighs heavy with accumulated grime and moisture, carrying the concentrated essence of every person who has slept beneath it before you. The room around you breathes with human presence. In the opposite corner, a family of 5 huddles together for warmth, their breathing shallow and labored. The mother rocks a baby that coughs with alarming frequency, each hack echoing wetly in the confined space. The father lies still, his breath rattling in his chest with the distinctive sound of consumption that you've learned to recognize as the prelude to death. 2 children, perhaps 6 and 8 years old, sleep fitfully between their parents, their small bodies already showing the telltale signs of malnutrition, rickets bowing their legs even in sleep. Against the far wall, an elderly woman sits upright, her eyes closed but her body rigid with pain. She clutches her stomach and occasionally releases soft moans that blend with the general symphony of suffering that fills the night air. A young man in his 20s lies near the door, his leg twisted an unnatural angle from a factory accident weeks ago. The wound has turned a disturbing shade of green, and the smell emanating from it adds another layer to the room's complex bouquet of human misery. You share this space with 8 other souls, paying 2 pence each for the privilege of sleeping indoors. 2 pence that represents nearly half a day's wages for those lucky enough to find work. The walls around you are thin wood planks that do little to keep out the cold December wind that whistles through gaps you could put your fist through. Ice crystals form on the inside of the walls where breath and body heat meet the frigid air, creating delicate patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't marking the boundary between shelter and certain death. The floor beneath you is bare earth, packed hard by countless feet and saturated with substances you'd rather not identify. When it rains, which it does frequently in London, the floor turns to mud that squelches between your toes and never quite dries. Tonight, you can feel the cold seeping up through the ground, through the inadequate barrier of straw, and into your bones. From somewhere in the building above, you hear the sound of an argument escalating to violence, followed by a woman's scream, and then sudden silence. This is common enough that no one in your room even stirs. In the building below, A baby wails endlessly while someone shouts in a language you don't recognize. The walls are so thin that you can hear conversations, fights, lovemaking, and death rattles from a dozen different rooms, all blending into the nighttime chorus of a London tenement. Your stomach cramps with hunger, a sensation so familiar it's become part of your identity. The last real meal you remember was 3 days ago, a piece of bread so hard you had to soak it in gin to make it chewable, and some cheese that tasted more of mold than milk. Since then, you've survived on scraps begged from better-dressed strangers and the occasional potato peel found in the gutters near more prosperous neighborhoods. The church bells begin to toll 5 o'clock in the morning, their bronze voices cutting through the December air and signaling the start of another day in this urban hell. Around you, bodies begin to stir as people wake to face another 18 hours of backbreaking labor, if they're fortunate enough to find work. If not, they'll spend the day walking the streets, searching for any opportunity to earn enough coin to secure another night's shelter. You pull the grimy wool blanket closer around your shoulders and feel it immediately dampen from your breath in the cold air. Your clothes, the same ones you've worn for the past month, cling to your body with a mixture of sweat, dirt, and substances you prefer not to contemplate. The fabric chafes against skin that hasn't been properly cleaned since you can remember, creating small wounds that refuse to heal in the persistent dampness and filth. The air you breathe tastes of coal and sulfur, tinged with the metallic tang of the nearby factories that never sleep. Each breath burns slightly, coating your throat with particles that will eventually settle in your lungs, joining the accumulation that's already begun to turn your sputum black. You can feel the grit between your teeth, in your eyes, under your fingernails. It's inescapable, this layer of industrial residue that marks every surface in this part of London. As consciousness fully returns, you become aware of the sounds outside your temporary refuge. Cart wheels rumble over cobblestones, their iron rims creating a constant percussion against stone. Horses snort and stamp, their hooves clattering as early workers begin to move through the streets. Vendors call out their wares and voices hoarse from coal smoke, offering bread, milk, and other necessities that might as well be luxuries for people at your economic level. The woman in the corner begins to weep quietly, her tears barely visible in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. Her baby has stopped moving during the night, its small chest no longer rising and falling with breath. This, too, is common enough that it barely registers as tragedy anymore. Just another casualty in the daily war between human life and the crushing indifference of industrial progress. You close your eyes and try to imagine clean sheets, warm rooms, and fresh air, but these concepts have become so foreign they might as well be fairy tales. This is your reality now. This room filled with dying strangers. This air that poisons with every breath. This cold that seeps into your bones and never leaves. And somehow, impossibly, you must find the strength to rise and face another day in Victorian London. Chapter 2. The Great Stink. You rise from your nest of rags, and immediately your lungs rebel against the act of breathing. The air in Victorian London doesn't just surround you, it assaults you. Each breath draws in a cocktail of poisons that would kill any modern person within hours. But here it's simply the atmosphere of daily life. The coal smoke alone is thick enough to taste, coating your tongue with the flavor of sulfur and ash, while your eyes stream tears that leave black tracks down your unwashed cheeks. Step outside your tenement building, and the assault intensifies. The sky above London hasn't been blue in living memory. Instead, it hangs like a brown woolen blanket, heavy with the exhalations of a million coal fires and hundreds of factory chimneys that never stop their poisonous output. The sun, when visible at all, appears as a pale orange disk filtered through layers of industrial haze. Some days, The smog is so thick you cannot see the building across the narrow street, and people carry lanterns even at midday to avoid walking into walls or falling into open sewers. The famous London fog, romanticized in later literature, is actually a deadly mixture of water vapor and coal smoke that Londoners call a pea souper for its thick yellow-green color. During particularly bad episodes, these fogs kill hundreds of people in a matter of days, suffocating the elderly and the young while leaving the survivors gasping and choking. The fog penetrates everywhere, seeping through closed windows and doors, turning indoor air nearly as toxic as what lurks in the streets. From the moment you step outside, your nose is assaulted by smells that defy description. The dominant odor is coal smoke, but layered beneath are stenches that would make modern humans vomit immediately. Raw sewage flows openly in gutters, mixing with industrial chemicals dumped by factories that operate without any oversight or regulation. The smell of rotting organic matter permeates everything, from decomposing food scraps to dead animals left where they fell in the streets. Every breath you take contains particles of lead from the paint factories, mercury vapor from the felt hat manufacturers, and arsenic dust from the wallpaper mills. Your lungs, designed to process clean air, begin to accumulate these poisons with each inhalation. The wealthy, recognizing the danger, have begun to retreat to country estates during the worst months. But the poor have no choice but to breathe poison every moment of every day. The horses that fill London streets contribute their own special horror to the atmospheric soup. Tens of thousands of these animals produce several tons of manure daily, most of which remains in the streets where it's ground to powder by wheels and hooves, then lifted into the air by wind to mix with the coal smoke. The ammonia from decomposing horse waste burns your throat and nose, while the dust coats everything in a fine layer of processed excrement. Industrial chimneys pump out clouds of sulfur dioxide that create acid rain, slowly dissolving the stone buildings and monuments of the city. This same acid falls on human skin and clothing, causing mysterious rashes and accelerating the decay of any organic material. Your clothes, already worn thin, dissolve faster in this acidic atmosphere, while your skin develops a persistent burning sensation that no amount of washing can relieve. The soap factories contribute their own unique poison to the air, releasing caustic live vapors that burn the respiratory system. Tanneries pump out hydrogen sulfide gas with its characteristic rotten egg smell, while the bone meal factories release ammonia and other nitrogenous compounds that make your eyes water uncontrollably. Match factories add phosphorus vapor to the mixture, creating a chemical that slowly dissolves the bones of workers and anyone unlucky enough to live nearby. At night, the air quality doesn't improve, but changes character. The thousands of gas lamps throughout the city consume oxygen while producing carbon monoxide, creating dead zones where people occasionally collapse and die without warning. The gas itself leaks constantly from poorly maintained pipes, creating pockets of explosive vapor that ignite randomly, sending flames shooting up from manholes and creating brief but terrifying displays of urban hellfire. Your clothing becomes a repository for all these airborne toxins. The fabric absorbs chemicals, particulates, and gases until it becomes essentially a wearable poison delivery system. The wool in your coat traps sulfur compounds that continue to release toxic fumes long after you've moved away from their source. Your cotton shirt absorbs acid rain and metal particles that cause constant skin irritation and mysterious health problems. Even indoors, the air offers no refuge. Coal fires in every home and business pump out carbon monoxide and particulates that accumulate in enclosed spaces. Windows remain closed against the outdoor pollution, trapping indoor toxins until the air becomes thick enough to see. People regularly die in their sleep from carbon monoxide poisoning, their bodies discovered in the morning with the telltale cherry red complexion of gas poisoning. The effects on human health are immediate and devastating. Your voice becomes permanently hoarse within weeks of breathing London air. Your teeth begin to discolor and decay at an accelerated rate as acid particles dissolve the enamel. Your fingernails take on a grayish tint from accumulated metal particles, while your hair becomes brittle and begins to fall out in clumps. Children born in London develop distinctive physical characteristics from breathing poisoned air from birth. Their growth is stunted, their lung capacity permanently reduced, and their life expectancy dramatically shortened. Many develop a persistent cough by age 3 that never goes away, a wet, rattling sound that becomes the soundtrack of urban childhood. The very act of sleeping becomes a nightly gamble with death. You lie down each evening not knowing if you'll wake up, as toxic gases accumulate in low-lying areas and enclosed spaces during the night. Some mornings, entire families are found dead in their beds, victims of an invisible atmospheric assassin that strikes without warning or mercy. As you stand in the street, try to breathe air that burns your lungs and stings your eyes, you realize that this isn't just weather or atmosphere. This is a chemical weapon deployed against an entire population, a slow-motion poisoning that kills some quickly and others over years of accumulated damage. The air itself has become an enemy, and there's no escape, no sanctuary, no refuge from the toxic embrace of Victorian London's atmosphere. Chapter 3. Wake up and smell the sewage. Your first conscious need of the day hits with the urgency of a physical blow to your abdomen. Nature calls, and in Victorian London, answering that call is a journey into one of humanity's most degrading and dangerous rituals. There are no private bathrooms in your world, no clean facilities, no running water, and certainly no toilet paper. Instead, there are communal privies, open sewers, and a system of human waste management that would make a medieval peasant grateful for his simple wooden bucket. You stumble from your sleeping space and join the queue forming outside the building's single privy, a wooden structure built over a cesspit that hasn't been emptied in months. The smell hits you before you can see the facility, a concentrated essence of human waste that seems to have achieved consciousness and malevolent intent. The stench is so powerful it makes your eyes water and your stomach heave, but this is the only option available to you and 30 other people who share this building. The privy itself is a wooden box with a hole cut in a plank, positioned over a pit that descends into darkness filled with the accumulated excrement of dozens of families. There's no door for privacy, just a piece of sacking that provides the illusion of separation from the queue of desperate people waiting their turn. The wooden seat is perpetually damp and crawling with insects that feast on the organic matter below, while the floor around the hole is slippery with substances you refuse to contemplate too closely. Toilet paper is a luxury that exists only in the homes of the wealthy, and even there it's often just cut-up newspaper or catalog pages. For people at your economic level, you use whatever you can find. Leaves when available, scraps of fabric when desperate, or simply your hand followed by a rinse in whatever water you can access. The concept of sanitary hygiene that future generations will take for granted doesn't exist here, where clean hands are an impossible dream and intestinal parasites are universal companions. The cesspit beneath the privy hasn't been emptied by the night soilmen in months, partly because the landlord refuses to pay for the service, and partly because the pit is so full that pumping it out would require special equipment that costs more than most people earn in a year. The waste has reached nearly to the level of the wooden seat, creating a horrifying situation where using the facility means risking contact with the accumulated excrement of strangers, along with whatever diseases that waste might carry. But even this degrading experience is luxury compared to what awaits if you venture into the streets at the wrong time. Many buildings have no facilities at all, forcing residents to use whatever corner, alley, or doorway they can find for relief. The streets themselves serve as open sewers, with human waste flowing alongside animal droppings, industrial runoff, and rainwater in channels cut down the center of roads that double as the city's primitive drainage system. Public houses of easement dot the city, commercial enterprises where you can pay a penny to use facilities that are marginally better than relieving yourself in the street. These establishments feature rows of holes cut in planks, positioned over larger cesspits, with dozens of people using the facilities simultaneously. Privacy is non-existent. Conversation is common, and the smell is indescribable. The operators of these facilities make their profit by charging for access, while spending as little as possible on maintenance, creating conditions that are barely functional and thoroughly disgusting. The wealthy have their own version of this nightmare in the form of earth closets, wooden boxes filled with ash or earth that's supposed to cover waste and control odor. Servants empty these containers daily, carrying human excrement through the house in buckets that leak and spill, spreading contamination throughout even the most elegant homes. The earth used in these closets is often just dirt from a garden, which means that vegetables grown in wealthy households are fertilized with human waste, creating a cycle of contamination that reaches even the finest dinner tables. For women, the situation becomes exponentially more dangerous and degrading. Victorian society demands that ladies maintain their modesty at all costs, but the realities of human biology don't accommodate social conventions. Women must navigate multiple layers of clothing, including corsets, bustles, and long skirts, while trying to use facilities that offer no privacy or cleanliness. The risk of exposure and social disgrace is constant, while the physical difficulty of managing elaborate clothing in filthy conditions adds humiliation to an already degrading process. The timing of nature's call often conflicts with work schedules that allow no breaks for personal needs. Factory workers must choose between relieving themselves in their workplace, with all the social and health consequences that entails, or suffering through hours of physical discomfort while operating dangerous machinery. Many choose to soil themselves rather than face unemployment, creating workplace conditions where the smell of human waste mingles with industrial chemicals to create an atmosphere of unimaginable foulness. Night presents its own special horrors, as venturing outside after dark to use communal facilities means risking assault, robbery, or worse in the unlit streets and alleys. Many people keep chamber pots in their sleeping spaces, ceramic vessels that must be emptied each morning by carrying them through shared living areas to dump the contents either in the communal cesspit or directly into the street. The sight of dozens of people carrying containers of human waste has become such a common morning ritual that children grow up thinking this is how all humans begin their day. The diseases that flourish in this environment of universal contamination spread through entire neighborhoods in a matter of days. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and dozens of other intestinal ailments pass from person to person through the contaminated water supply, shared facilities, and complete absence of sanitary practices. Entire families die within weeks of each other, their bodies added to the growing pile of victims claimed by London's primitive approach to human waste management. As you finish your business and step away from the privy, your shoes squelch in mud that you know contains far more than just rainwater and dirt. This mixture of human waste, animal droppings, and chemical runoff will follow you wherever you walk today, tracked into buildings, homes, and workplaces on the feet of every person navigating London streets. You've begun your day by participating in a ritual that would horrify any person from a more sanitary age. But here it's simply part of the routine degradation that defines existence in Victorian London. Chapter 4. Breakfast of Champions. Your stomach gnaws at your spine with the familiar agony of prolonged hunger as you contemplate your first meal of the day. though calling it a meal requires considerable optimism. In Victorian London, food isn't nourishment so much as it's a daily gamble with death, where every bite might contain enough poison to kill you, and every meal you skip brings you closer to starvation. The concept of food safety doesn't exist here, where profit margins matter more than human lives, and regulation is a word that applies to everything except what people put in their mouths. You make your way to the nearest bakery, where the smell of fresh bread mingles with the acrid odor of the chemicals used to make it white and appealing. The loaves in the window look inviting, their crusts golden and their surfaces dusted with what appears to be flour, but is actually a mixture of chalk, alum, and sometimes plaster of Paris. These additives make the bread whiter and heavier, allowing bakers to charge more while using less actual grain, but they also slowly poison anyone who eats them regularly. The piece of bread you can afford costs 3 pence, nearly a third of your daily wages if you're lucky enough to find work. It's hard enough to chip teeth on, partly because it was baked yesterday, and partly because the flour used to make it contains sawdust, ground bones, and other cheap fillers that create a product more suitable for construction than consumption. You gnaw at it carefully, trying to soften it with saliva while avoiding the sharp fragments that could cut your mouth and throat. The butter offered to spread on your bread gleams with an unnatural yellow color that comes from chrome yellow paint, a lead-based dye that makes rancid fat look fresh and appealing. The real butter has long since spoiled in the absence of refrigeration, turning into a gray, rancid mass that even the desperate poor won't purchase. What's sold as butter is usually a mixture of animal fat, vegetable oil, and whatever coloring agents are cheap and available, creating a substance that looks like food but delivers a cocktail of heavy metals and industrial chemicals with every bite. If you're fortunate enough to afford tea, you pour hot water over leaves that have been used and reused so many times they've lost any connection to their original source. Tea dealers buy used leaves from wealthy households, dry them, color them with toxic dyes, and sell them to the poor as fresh product. The green color in some teas comes from copper carbonate, while the black varieties get their rich hue from iron sulfate and other industrial chemicals that create the appearance of quality while delivering doses of poison. The milk available at local shops has been watered down with liquid from the nearest pump, which might draw from a well contaminated with sewage or from the Thames itself. To make this diluted mixture look richer, sellers add chalk for color and occasionally starch for thickness. The cows that originally produced this milk live in urban dairies, crowded into basement stalls where they never see sunlight and subsist on grain so moldy and contaminated it would be rejected as animal feed in any rational society. These urban dairy cows are tubercular, their lungs rotting with disease that passes directly into their milk. The animals cough constantly, spraying infected droplets over the containers used to collect their milk, while their handlers, themselves infected with consumption, add their own bacterial contributions to the product. Drinking this milk is like inoculating yourself with tuberculosis, but it's often the only source of protein available to families teetering on the edge of starvation. Sugar, when you can afford it, comes in blocks that have been cut with sand, plaster, and sometimes ground glass to increase weight and volume. The white crystals that look so pure have been processed using bone char from animal skeletons, giving your sweetener a taste of death that lingers on your tongue. The refining process involves lead pipes and copper vessels that leave traces of heavy metals in the final product, slowly accumulating in your body with each spoonful. Meat is available in the markets, hanging in open stalls where flies cluster so thickly they obscure the surface of the flesh. The animals used for this meat died from disease more often than slaughter. Their carcasses sold quickly before the rot becomes too obvious to disguise. There's no inspection, no regulation, no concern for the health of consumers who desperate enough to buy meat that glows with phosphorescent bacteria or drips with fluids that have nothing to do with normal decomposition. The sausages offered by street vendors contain scraps swept up from slaughterhouse floors, mixed with sawdust, colored with red lead, and stuffed into casings made from the intestines of diseased animals. What meat they do contain might come from horses, dogs, cats, or rats, depending on what dead animals the manufacturer could acquire cheaply. The grinding process disguises the source while the heavy seasoning masks the taste of decay, creating products that fill stomachs while slowly poisoning the people desperate enough to eat them. Vegetables, when available, have been grown in soil fertilized with human excrement collected from the city cesspits. The practice of night soil farming means that every carrot, potato, and cabbage has been nourished by human waste, creating a direct pathway for intestinal parasites and diseases to pass from the sewers to the dinner table. These vegetables are never washed properly, partly because clean water isn't available and partly because the concept of foodborne illness hasn't yet been connected to sanitary practices. The water you drink with your meal comes from pumps that draw from wells dug next to graveyards, where corpses decompose directly into the water table. Some wells are positioned downstream from industrial sites, where chemical runoff creates rainbow sheens on the water surface and flavors that burn your tongue and throat. This water carries cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and dozens of other diseases, making every drink a potential death sentence. Even the containers used to serve food contribute their own dangers to your meal. Pewter plates and cups contain lead that leaches into acidic foods and drinks, slowly accumulating in your nervous system until you develop the tremors and mental confusion that mark advanced heavy metal poisoning. Ceramic glazes often contain arsenic or other toxic compounds that dissolve into whatever they contain, turning every meal into a small dose of industrial poison. As you choke down your breakfast of adulterated bread, contaminated milk, and chemically treated tea, your body begins the day's work of trying to extract nutrition from substances that are more poison than food. Your digestive system rebels against the chalk, sawdust, and chemical additives, while your liver struggles to process the heavy metals and industrial compounds that accompany every bite. This isn't breakfast so much as it's a slow suicide by consumption, a daily ritual of poisoning that will eventually kill you as surely as any acute disease, but much more slowly and painfully. Chapter 5: Fashion Victims. The clothes hanging on your body tell a story of slow death by design. In Victorian London, fashion isn't just about appearance. It's about survival, social status, and the daily risk of being poisoned by the very fabric that covers your skin. Your single outfit, worn continuously for months without washing, has become a second skin that chafes, burns, and slowly kills you with every thread. Your dress or shirt glows with an unnatural emerald green, a shade so vivid and beautiful it draws admiring glances from passers-by who don't realize they're looking at concentrated arsenic. Sheely's green, the most fashionable color of the era, contains enough poison to kill a child with prolonged contact. The dye leaches into your skin with every drop of sweat, every moment of friction, slowly accumulating in your liver and brain until your hands shake and your vision blurs with the telltale signs of heavy metal poisoning. The fabric itself scratches against your unwashed skin like sandpaper made of nettles. Wool processed with harsh chemicals creates a texture that leaves raw patches wherever clothing rubs against your body. Cotton treated with sulfuric acid to achieve that coveted white appearance burns your skin in patches that never quite heal, weeping constantly in the damp London air. The manufacturing process uses mercury, lead, and other industrial chemicals that remain embedded in the fibers, creating garments that are essentially wearable poison. If you're a woman, your corset squeezes your ribcage with the force of a slow-motion crushing accident. Made from whalebone and steel, it compresses your organs into unnatural positions, displacing your liver, compressing your lungs, and reshaping your spine in ways that cause permanent damage. Breathing becomes a conscious effort as your lung capacity shrinks to accommodate the demands of fashion. Your waist measures 18 inches not through exercise or diet, but through daily torture that leaves bruises and pressure sores that never heal. The corset stays pierced through the fabric regularly, stabbing into your flesh with every movement. Infections develop where the metal cuts your skin, festering in the airless environment created by layers of unwashable clothing. Some women die from these infections, their bodies unable to fight off bacteria in wounds that can't be properly cleaned or allowed to heal. Others suffer for years with chronic pain as their ribs crack under constant pressure and heal incorrectly. Your petticoats and crinolines create a cage of fabric around your legs that makes every movement dangerous. The horsehair padding and wire framework can weigh up to 14 pounds, turning simple tasks like climbing stairs into exhausting ordeals. Walking through doorways requires careful calculation, while sitting becomes an engineering challenge that often results in embarrassing exposure or damaged furniture. But the greatest danger comes from fire. Your clothing is essentially a collection of highly flammable materials treated with combustible chemicals and arranged in the most dangerous possible configuration. The crinolines act like chimneys, channeling flames upward around your body, while the layers of fabric provide ample fuel for fires that can consume a person in minutes. Women burst into flames regularly, sometimes from simply standing too close to a fireplace or gaslight, their bodies becoming human torches as their fashionable clothing turns them into victims of spontaneous combustion. The dyes used to color your clothes contain a rainbow of poisons. Red fabrics get their color from mercury, creating garments that slowly drive wearers insane with neurological damage. Yellow dyes contain lead chromate, causing anemia and kidney damage with prolonged exposure. Purple clothing uses aniline dyes that cause bladder cancer, while orange fabrics contain compounds that destroy the nervous system over time. Your shoes, if you're fortunate enough to own them, are made from leather treated with chromium and other heavy metals that leach through your socks and into your feet. The metal eyelets and buckles contain lead and other toxic substances that discolor your skin wherever they touch. The leather itself comes from animals that died of disease, their hides processed with chemicals that preserve the material while poisoning anyone who wears it. Children's clothing presents its own special horrors. Infants dressed in garments colored with arsenic green dye, mysterious deaths, their small bodies unable to process even minimal exposure to the poison in their clothes. Older children wear miniature versions of adult fashion, including corsets for girls as young as 5 and tight-fitting garments that restrict growth and cause permanent deformities. The process of getting dressed each morning becomes a ritual of self-harm as you layer poison against poison, tightening restraints that cut off circulation and restrict breathing. Buttons made from toxic materials burn your fingers as you fasten them, while the act of putting on your corset requires assistance from others who must pull the laces tight enough to cause physical damage. Washing these clothes is impossible not only because water is scarce and contaminated, but because the chemicals used in manufacturing make the fabrics too delicate to survive cleaning. Instead, you wear the same outfit day after day as it accumulates dirt, sweat, bacteria, and environmental toxins until it becomes a concentrated source of disease and poison that follows you everywhere. Your clothing identifies your social class immediately and accurately. The poor wear rags so contaminated with industrial chemicals they glow in the dark, while the wealthy sport garments that kill them more slowly, but just as certainly. Fashion becomes a competition to see who can poison themselves most elegantly with the most socially acceptable toxins in the most aesthetically pleasing manner. As you adjust your collar and straighten your skirts, you feel the familiar burn of chemical dyes against your neck and the sharp pressure of stays against your ribs. Every thread of clothing on your body carries death, but removing it would mean arrest for indecency and certain social destruction. In Victorian London, you must choose between slow poisoning by fashion or fast destruction by society. Chapter 6: The Daily Grind. The factory whistle screams across London at 5 in the morning, a sound that cuts through the coal smoke and fog like the cry of a mechanical banshee summoning the dead to labor. You stumble through dark streets toward your workplace, joining rivers of human misery flowing toward the industrial heart of the city. The sound of thousands of feet on cobblestones creates a drumbeat of desperation as workers march toward another day of backbreaking labor that will slowly kill them one shift at a time. Your factory squats beside the Thames like a brick monster, its chimneys breathing poison into the sky while its windows glow orange with furnace light. The building trembles constantly from the machinery within, creating vibrations that can be felt blocks away and that slowly shake apart the surrounding tenements where workers live. Steam hisses from countless pipes while the air around the factory shimmers with heat and chemical vapors that make your eyes water before you even enter the building. Inside, the noise hits you like a physical blow. The machinery screams, pounds, and roars with such intensity that workers regularly go deaf within months of starting employment. You cannot hear your own voice over the cacophony, making communication impossible except through gestures and lip reading. The constant noise burrows into your brain, creating headaches that never end and a ringing in your ears that continues even in the rare moments of silence. The air inside the factory is thick enough to chew. Cotton fibers float in clouds so dense they obscure the ceiling, coating your lungs with material that will eventually suffocate you. If you work in a match factory, phosphorus vapor burns your mouth and throat while slowly dissolving the bones in your jaw, creating the dreaded phossy jaw that leaves workers with faces that rot away while they're still alive. Chemical factories fill the air with compounds so toxic that workers collapse regularly, their bodies unable to process the poison they breathe with every breath. Your workday begins before dawn and ends after sunset, a 16-hour stretch of continuous labor with breaks only for meals that taste of the chemicals polluting the air around you. The machinery never stops, creating a rhythm of production that demands human bodies move in perfect synchronization with mechanical parts. Those who can't keep pace are crushed, mangled, or simply discarded for newer workers who haven't yet learned to fear the machines. Children as young as 6 work alongside you, their small bodies perfect for crawling under moving machinery to retrieve, drop materials, or oil mechanical parts. They scamper between massive gears and spinning wheels like human mice, occasionally disappearing with wet sounds when they move too slowly or stumble at the wrong moment. Factory owners prefer children because they're cheap, expendable, and their small fingers can perform delicate tasks that adult hands cannot manage. The heat in metal foundries reaches levels that would kill modern workers within hours. You labor next to furnaces that glow white hot, their radiant energy cooking your skin even from a distance. Molten metal splashes regularly, creating burns that never heal properly in the filthy conditions of industrial work. Your clothes smoke and sometimes ignite from proximity to the heat, while your lungs sear with every breath of superheated air. Safety equipment doesn't exist because worker safety isn't a concern for factory owners whose profit margins depend on pushing human bodies beyond their limits. You work with dangerous chemicals while wearing clothes that dissolve from exposure to industrial acids. Machinery operates without guards or protection, creating opportunities for fingers, hands, arms, and entire bodies to be caught in gears, belts, and pulleys that crush bone and tear flesh without slowing down. Industrial accidents happen so frequently, they're considered part of a normal cost of production. Workers lose limbs regularly, their severed body parts swept away with other industrial waste, while replacement workers step over blood stains to continue production. Those injured on the job receive no compensation, no medical care, and no sympathy from employers who view human workers as interchangeable parts in their profit-making machinery. The chemicals you handle daily would require hazmat suits and extensive safety protocols in any rational workplace. But here you work with bare hands and inadequate clothing. Acids burn through your skin while heavy metals accumulate in your organs, slowly poisoning you with symptoms that won't appear for years. Dye works stain your hands permanently, while tanneries expose you to compounds that destroy your nervous system one shift at a time. Women face additional horrors in workplaces designed by men who view female workers as inherently disposable. Sexual assault is routine and expected, while pregnancy means automatic termination without compensation. Women work the same dangerous machinery as men while wearing corsets and long skirts that create additional hazards in environments already designed to maim and kill. Your wages, when paid at all, amount to barely enough to survive another day. Factory owners regularly delay payment for weeks or months, knowing that workers cannot afford to quit even when they're not being paid. Company stores sell necessities at inflated prices, creating debt that keeps workers trapped in cycles of labor that benefit only their employers. The end of your shift brings no relief, only the knowledge that you must return tomorrow to continue the slow process of dying for wages that barely keep you alive. Your body aches from injuries both recent and chronic, while your lungs burn from inhaling industrial poison for 16 hours. The machines continue running through the night, their noise following you home to haunt your few hours of rest before the whistle calls you back to another day of mechanical hell. As you stumble home through dark streets, your clothes smoking from chemical exposure and your hands bleeding from contact with machinery designed to destroy human flesh, you realize that you're not just working for wages. You're trading your life, day by day, hour by hour, for the privilege of surviving long enough to trade more of it tomorrow. Chapter 7. London's Liquid Death. The glass of water in your trembling hand looks clear enough in the dim gaslight, but appearances deceive in Victorian London, where death flows through every pipe, well, and pump in the city. This liquid that you desperately need to survive carries more ways to kill you than a medieval torture chamber. Each drop a lottery ticket where the prize is cholera, typhoid, or any of dozens of diseases that turn your intestines into battlegrounds and your body into a vessel for agony. The Thames, London's primary water source, serves simultaneously as the city's main sewer, its industrial waste dump, and its principal cemetery. Raw sewage flows directly into the river from hundreds of outfall pipes, creating a brown, chunky mixture that resembles soup more than water. Dead animals float past regularly, their bloated corpses adding to the organic richness of liquid that will eventually flow from taps throughout the city after minimal processing that removes visible chunks but leaves the microscopic killers intact. Private water companies draw from the Thames at points downstream from sewage outlets, ensuring that every glass of water contains the concentrated essence of London's human and industrial waste. The intake pipes sit in water so polluted that fish cannot survive in it. Yet this same liquid flows into homes where families drink it unknowingly with every meal. The companies charge premium prices for this liquid death, marketing it as pure and healthful, while knowing that it carries diseases that will kill thousands of their customers. Your neighborhood pump draws from a well-positioned strategically next to a graveyard where cholera victims have been buried in mass graves. The decomposing corpses leach directly into the groundwater, creating an underground river of death that feeds the pump from which you must draw your daily water supply. The pump handle feels slick under your hands, polished smooth by the desperate grip of thousands of people who had no choice but to drink poison or die of thirst. The water tastes of decay and industrial chemicals, its metallic tang coating your tongue with flavors that shouldn't exist in anything meant for human consumption. Lead pipes used throughout the distribution system add their own special contribution, slowly accumulating in your nervous system until your hands shake and your mind struggles to form coherent thoughts. The sweet taste of lead makes the water more palatable, while simultaneously destroying your brain one sip at a time. Industrial waste flows freely into every water source in London as factories dump their chemical byproducts wherever convenient. Tanneries discharge acids and heavy metals that create rainbow sheens on water surfaces, while dye works add brilliant colors that make water look festive while delivering concentrated poison to anyone foolish enough to drink it. Match factories contribute phosphorus compounds that glow in the dark, turning water into a luminescent cocktail of death. Ice, sold as a luxury to wealthy households, comes from the same polluted sources as drinking water, but carries an additional concentration of toxins that freeze into crystalline form. The ice harvesting process involves cutting blocks from rivers and ponds where human waste and industrial chemicals have accumulated in frozen layers, creating products that look pure while containing enough poison to kill entire families. Wealthy households pride themselves on serving iced drinks without realizing they're offering guests concentrated doses of everything that makes London's water deadly. The process of boiling water to make tea provides no protection against the chemical contamination that defines London's water supply. While heat may kill some bacteria, it concentrates the heavy metals, industrial chemicals, and other toxins that remain dissolved in the liquid. Your morning tea becomes a concentrated essence of urban pollution, its familiar taste masking the reality that you're drinking processed sewage flavored with industrial waste. Water storage in homes and businesses creates additional opportunities for contamination as lead-line tanks, ceramic vessels glazed with toxic compounds, and wooden barrels treated with poisonous preservatives all add their own contributions to liquid that was already deadly before it left the source. Standing water develops its own ecosystem of bacteria and parasites that multiply in the dark, warm conditions of indoor storage, creating cultures of disease that grow stronger with each passing day. Rainwater, collected in barrels and cisterns throughout the city, offers no refuge from contamination as it falls through air thick with industrial chemicals, coal smoke, and organic matter. The water that reaches collection vessels has been thoroughly poisoned during its passage through London's toxic atmosphere, carrying dissolved metals, acids, and particles that make it as dangerous as any other source in the city. Public fountains and communal water sources become focal points for disease transmission as contaminated vessels spread illness from person to person. The shared cups and ladles used at these locations carry bacteria and viruses between users, ensuring that disease spreads as efficiently as possible through populations already weakened by malnutrition and exposure to environmental toxins. Children, whose smaller bodies cannot tolerate the same levels of contamination as adults, die regularly from drinking water that adults might survive for weeks or months. Infant mortality rates skyrocket in neighborhoods where water contamination reaches peak levels, while those children who survive develop chronic health problems that mark them for life with the consequences of drinking poison during their most vulnerable years. The wealthy attempt to protect themselves by purchasing water from sources outside London. But even these supposedly pure supplies become contaminated during transport through pipes, storage in toxic containers, and exposure to London's polluted air. Money cannot buy safety from water contamination in a city where every drop of liquid has been thoroughly poisoned by industrial progress and human waste. As you swallow another mouthful of this liquid death, you feel it burning slightly as it goes down, leaving an aftertaste of metal and decay that lingers long after the glass is empty. Your body needs water to survive, but every drop you consume brings you closer to death by cholera, typhoid, or slow heavy metal poisoning. In Victorian London, Water sustains life and destroys it simultaneously. Each sip a gamble with odds that favor the house of death. Chapter 8. Victorian Medicine. The doctor approaching your bedside carries the smell of death on his unwashed hands, his black coat stiff with dried blood from previous patients who didn't survive his treatments. In Victorian London, seeking medical help often hastens death rather than preventing it, as practitioners armed with theories based on superstition and treatments derived from medieval torture methods wage war against human bodies already weakened by industrial poison and urban disease. Your physician begins his examination without washing his hands, using the same fingers that just completed an autopsy to probe your swollen glands and fevered skin. The concept of germs remains unknown to medical science, leaving doctors free to spread disease efficiently from patient to patient while charging substantial fees for the privilege of being infected with ailments you didn't previously possess. His instruments, crusted with organic matter from previous procedures, carry bacteria and viruses between patients like traveling salesmen of death. The diagnosis comes swiftly and with absolute confidence despite being based on pseudoscience and guesswork. Your illness, like all others, stems from an imbalance of the four humors that govern human health according to medical wisdom unchanged since ancient Greece. Your blood is too hot, your bile too thick, your constitution too damp, requiring immediate intervention to restore harmony through procedures that would be considered torture in any other context. Bloodletting begins immediately as the doctor opens veins in your arms with blades that haven't been cleaned since their last use. Your blood, supposedly the source of your illness, flows into bowls while your body weakens further from the loss of fluid it desperately needs to fight infection. The doctor measures success by the amount of blood extracted, sometimes draining patients until they faint from blood loss while their underlying conditions worsen without treatment. When bloodletting proves insufficient, leeches attached to your skin begin their medieval feast, each creature swelling with blood while injecting anticoagulants that prevent clotting and ensure continued bleeding long after the parasites are removed. Your skin erupts in bleeding wounds that refuse to heal, becoming infected in the filthy conditions that define medical practice in Victorian London. The leeches themselves, reused between patients, carry diseases from previous victims directly into your bloodstream. Mercury treatments for syphilis and other conditions slowly poison your nervous system while failing to address the underlying infections they're meant to cure. The heavy metal accumulates in your brain and organs, causing tremors, mental confusion, and eventual death from poisoning that's often more horrible than the original disease. Patients develop the characteristic symptoms of mercury poisoning, their teeth falling out, their hands shaking uncontrollably, their minds deteriorating into madness. Opium prescribed for pain relief creates addiction that proves more devastating than the original ailments requiring treatment. Patients become dependent on drugs that provide temporary relief while ensuring long-term suffering as their bodies require increasingly large doses to achieve any effect. The opium trade creates generations of addicts whose lives revolve around obtaining substances that destroy their health while enriching the doctors who prescribe them. Surgery, performed without anesthesia or antiseptic procedures, becomes an exercise in human endurance as patients are held down by assistants, while surgeons cut through flesh with instruments designed more for speed than precision. The absence of pain relief means that only the most desperate patients submit to procedures that often kill through shock, even when technically successful. Operating theaters become venues for public entertainment as audiences pay to watch humans suffer the ultimate medical spectacle. Childbirth transforms into a gauntlet of medical intervention that kills mothers and infants at rates that would horrify modern practitioners. Doctors, convinced of their superiority over traditional midwives, introduce instruments and procedures that cause more harm than the natural process they're meant to improve. Forceps crush infant skulls while internal examinations spread puerperal fever that kills new mothers in agony as their reproductive organs rot with infection. Mental illness receives treatment through methods designed to break the human spirit rather than heal psychological wounds. Patients are restrained in mechanical devices, subjected to ice baths and spinning chairs, force-fed medications that cause hallucinations and seizures. Asylums become prisons where the mentally ill are tortured systematically, while their families pay substantial fees for treatments that ensure permanent disability rather than recovery. Patent medicines sold without regulation contain combinations of alcohol, cocaine, opium, and industrial chemicals marketed as cures for everything from headaches to consumption. These substances create addiction while masking symptoms of serious diseases that require actual medical attention. Children receive doses of morphine for teething pain, while adults consume mercury-based tonics that promise health while delivering slow death through heavy metal poisoning. The wealthy receive more elaborate versions of the same deadly treatments, their superior financial resources ensuring access to larger doses of poison delivered in more elegant surroundings. Private physicians provide house calls that bring disease directly to previously healthy households, while expensive sanitariums offer luxury accommodations for dying in comfort while receiving treatments that guarantee death. Your fever climbs as the doctor's treatments weaken your body's natural defenses, his interventions ensuring that minor illnesses become major health crises. Each procedure introduces new infections while weakening your capacity to fight existing diseases, creating cascading health failures that justify additional treatments in an endless cycle of medical destruction. As you lie bleeding from multiple wounds, poisoned by mercury, weakened by bloodletting, and addicted to opium, you realize that seeking medical help has transformed a survivable illness into a certain death sentence. In Victorian London, doctors practiced medicine like medieval executioners, their treatments guaranteeing suffering while delivering death with scientific precision disguised as healing. Chapter 9. Dinner and Death. Evening brings no relief from the daily gamble with poison that defines eating in Victorian London. Your second meal of the day, if you're fortunate enough to afford one, arrives on your plate carrying the same deadly potential as breakfast, but concentrated by hours of decomposition in the absence of refrigeration. The meat before you glows with an unnatural phosphorescence. Bacteria so abundant they create their own light show while transforming protein into putrefaction. The butcher shop where you purchase this evening's meat displays its wares in open air, hanging from hooks while flies cluster so thickly they obscure the surface of the flesh. The animals that provided this protein died from diseases more often than slaughter. Their infected carcasses sold quickly before the signs of illness become too obvious for even desperate customers to ignore. Tuberculosis, anthrax, and other livestock diseases pass directly from dead animals to dinner tables without inspection or concern for human health. Your piece of beef has been hanging in the shop for days, its surface developing a greenish tint that the butcher disguises with fresh blood from recently slaughtered animals. The interior remains red while the exterior rots, creating a gradient of decomposition that varies from merely contaminated to actively toxic. Maggots have begun their work in the darker crevices, their presence accepted as normal in meat that will be cooked thoroughly enough to mask the taste of decay. The vegetables accompanying your meat were grown in fields fertilized with human excrement collected from London's overflowing cesspits. Night soil men spread raw sewage across agricultural land, creating direct pathways for intestinal parasites and diseases to travel from city toilets to dinner plates. These vegetables are never properly washed, partly because clean water isn't available and partly because the concept of foodborne illness hasn't yet connected sanitary practices with disease prevention. Your potato, the cornerstone of working-class nutrition, shows telltale green patches that indicate solanine poisoning, a natural toxin that develops when potatoes are exposed to light during storage. The green areas contain enough poison to cause nausea, headaches, and neurological symptoms. But removing these sections would eliminate too much of the edible portion for families living on the edge of starvation. You eat the toxic parts along with the safe ones, adding plant poison to the bacterial contamination already present in your meal. The bread served alongside your meat carries its own arsenal of adulterants designed to increase profit while decreasing nutritional value. Alum keeps the bread white while slowly poisoning your digestive system. Chalk adds weight while providing no nutrition, and sawdust extends the flour while introducing wood fibers that your stomach cannot process. The crust crumbles to reveal interior sections that sparkle with ground glass added to increase weight, creating tiny cuts in your mouth and throat with every bite. Milk purchased for your evening tea comes from cows housed in urban dairies where animals never see sunlight and subsist on grains so moldy it would be condemned as animal feed in any rational society. These tubercular cows produce milk that carries disease directly from their infected udders to your cup, while the milk itself has been watered down with liquid from pumps that draw from contaminated wells. Chalk and starch added to restore color and consistency create a substance that resembles milk while delivering concentrated doses of bacteria and industrial chemicals. The cooking process offers no protection against the contamination that defines every ingredient in your meal. Your coal fire produces carbon monoxide that accumulates in the poorly ventilated kitchen while coating food with particles of industrial ash. The pots and pans used for cooking contain lead that leaches into acidic foods, slowly accumulating in your nervous system with each meal. Water used for cooking comes from the same contaminated sources that supply drinking water, ensuring that boiling concentrates rather than eliminates the toxins present in every ingredient. Salt used to season your food contains impurities that include sand, plaster, and occasionally arsenic compounds used in the purification process. The white crystals that enhance flavor also deliver doses of heavy metals and industrial chemicals that accumulate in your organs over time. Pepper, when available, has often been adulterated with ground charcoal, brick dust, or other substances that add weight while reducing the actual spice content to negligible levels. Your dinner wine, if you can afford such luxury, has been fortified with industrial alcohol and colored with lead-based dyes that create appealing hues while slowly poisoning your liver and brain. The grapes used for wine production grow in soil contaminated with industrial runoff, while the fermentation process occurs in vessels lined with lead that adds its own contribution to the toxic mixture. Each sip delivers ethanol mixed with heavy metals and industrial chemicals in proportions that would horrify modern toxicologists. The dining room where you consume this poisonous feast is lit by gas lamps that consume oxygen while producing carbon monoxide, creating an atmosphere where food poisoning combines with gas poisoning to ensure that meals become exercises in survival rather than nutrition. The wallpaper surrounding your table contains arsenic dyes that slowly release toxic vapors, especially in the warm, humid conditions created by cooking and human respiration. Storage of leftover food creates additional opportunities for contamination as meat and vegetables decompose rapidly in the absence of refrigeration. What you don't consume immediately becomes breeding ground for bacteria and parasites that multiply overnight, transforming tomorrow's breakfast into concentrated cultures of disease. The cycle of contamination continues endlessly as each meal introduces new toxins, while previous meals continue rotting in your digestive system. As you swallow the last bites of your evening meal, you taste the familiar metallic tang of lead, the bitter aftertaste of industrial chemicals, and the sweet flavor of decomposition that characterizes all food in Victorian London. Your stomach rebels against the toxic mixture while your body attempts to extract nutrition from substances that contain more poison than sustenance, ensuring that dinner becomes another step in the slow process of dying by consumption. Chapter 10: Crime and Punishment. The sound of the gallows being erected in the courtyard outside your window serves as morning alarm clock and evening lullaby in Victorian London, where justice moves with the mechanical precision of industrial machinery designed to process human lives into public entertainment. Death sentences flow from courtrooms like manufactured goods from factories, each verdict adding another body to the growing inventory of souls scheduled for systematic termination in front of cheering crowds. Your crime, stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving family, carries the same penalty as murder in a legal system that values property above human life. The magistrate who sentenced you to hang barely looked up from his paperwork as he condemned you to death, his decision influenced more by social class than criminal intent. Theft by the wealthy is business, while theft by the poor is a capital offense requiring immediate and public execution. The courtroom where your fate was decided operates with the efficiency of a slaughterhouse processing livestock for market. Defendants shuffle through in assembly line fashion, their guilt predetermined by circumstances of birth and economic status rather than evidence or legal argument. Justice wears a blindfold not to ensure impartiality, but to avoid seeing the human cost of decisions made in service to social order and economic hierarchy. Your cell in Newgate Prison accommodates 12 people in a space designed for 4, creating conditions where survival depends on claiming territory through violence or negotiation. The air inside the stone walls carries the concentrated essence of human suffering, thick with the breath of dying men and the stench of waste that accumulates faster than it can be removed. Prisoners sleep standing up when space permits, lying in shifts when it doesn't, their bodies providing warmth for others while slowly consuming themselves through starvation and disease. Food in prison consists of whatever scraps the guards choose to provide, often bread so moldy it moves with insect life and water drawn from wells contaminated with sewage from the prison's overflowing waste systems. Prisoners fight over crusts and bones while guards sell better food to those who can pay, creating internal economies where human dignity is traded for temporary survival. The wealthy purchase private cells and decent meals, while the poor rot in communal spaces where death comes through violence or slow starvation. Public executions transform punishment into festival occasions where entire families gather to watch human beings die for entertainment. Children sit on their fathers' shoulders for better views while vendors sell food and drink to spectators who cheer each death with enthusiasm usually reserved for sporting events. The condemned become performers in grotesque theater, where their final moments provide amusement for crowds that view death as recreational activity. The machinery of execution operates with industrial precision designed to maximize spectacle while ensuring death occurs slowly enough for audience appreciation. Hanging victims dance at ropes end for minutes while their bodies fight against strangulation, their struggles providing entertainment for crowds that bet on survival time and execution efficiency. The platform accommodates multiple simultaneous executions, creating opportunities for comparative suffering analysis among spectators. Transportation to penal colonies offers alternatives to death that often prove worse than immediate execution. Ships packed with convicts create floating hells where disease and violence kill passengers long before they reach distant shores designed to receive Britain's unwanted population. Those who survive the voyage face years of forced labor in conditions that make London's factories seem luxurious by comparison. Their exile serving as warnings to potential criminals while clearing space in overcrowded domestic prisons. Debtors' prisons confine entire families for financial crimes that include inability to pay rent, failure to settle commercial obligations, and defaulting on loans obtained for basic survival. Children grow up behind bars for their parents' economic failures, while wives serve sentences for debts incurred by husbands they cannot legally control. These institutions operate as permanent residence facilities where families spend generations paying for financial mistakes through lifetime imprisonment. Police forces patrol the streets with authority to arrest anyone whose appearance suggests criminal intent, a standard that applies primarily to the poor, the foreign, and anyone whose clothing indicates insufficient social status. Officers carry clubs and handcuffs while lacking training in investigation or evidence collection, their primary function being to maintain order through intimidation rather than solve crimes through detection. Justice depends on social position more than guilt or innocence, with conviction rates varying inversely with economic status. Private justice flourishes in neighborhoods where official law enforcement proves inadequate or corrupt. Vigilante groups organize to punish suspected criminals through beatings, exile, or death without benefit of trial or evidence beyond neighborhood suspicion. These informal courts operate according to social prejudice and personal grudges, their verdicts carrying immediate execution by groups of citizens who view themselves as guardians of community virtue. The legal system creates more criminals than it prevents as laws criminalize poverty, unemployment, and homelessness while failing to address the economic conditions that create desperation. Vagrancy statutes make sleeping rough illegal, while providing no alternatives for those without homes, ensuring that homelessness becomes a crime punishable by imprisonment that prevents employment and guarantees continued poverty. The law creates endless cycles of criminalization where survival itself violates social order. Children face the same legal penalties as adults, with boys and girls as young as 8 receiving death sentences for crimes that reflect desperation rather than criminal intent. The courts make no accommodation for age, circumstance, or social condition when dispensing justice that falls most heavily on those least able to defend themselves. Small bodies hang from adult-sized gallows while crowds cheer the efficient elimination of problems too young to vote but old enough to die. As you await your execution for the crime of feeding your family, you listen to the sounds of justice being administered throughout the prison, the cries of those being flogged, the prayers of those facing death, and the mechanical efficiency of a system designed to process human suffering into social order through systematic application of legally sanctioned violence. Chapter 11. God Save the Queen. The church bells that summon you to mandatory worship each Sunday morning ring out across London like iron chains binding souls to suffering, their bronze voices proclaiming divine approval for earthly misery while promising heavenly rewards for those who endure poverty with proper Christian resignation. Your attendance at services is not optional, but required by social convention and legal necessity, as absence from worship marks you as morally suspect and potentially seditious in a society where religious conformity serves as proof of political loyalty. The church where you huddle with hundreds of other unwashed bodies rises like a stone monument to hypocrisy, its soaring architecture financed by the very wealth that keeps congregants in perpetual poverty. Stained glass windows depict biblical scenes of charity and compassion, while real charity remains absent from the institution that preaches love while practicing indifference to human suffering. The building itself consumes resources that could feed entire neighborhoods, while serving as a showcase for divine architecture that glorifies God while ignoring his people. Your pew, if the rough wooden bench can be dignified with such a term, accommodates far more bodies than comfort allows, creating intimate contact with strangers whose personal hygiene reflects the same lack of washing facilities that defines your own aromatic presence. The air inside the sanctuary grows thick with human exhalation and industrial particles carried on clothing, while the absence of ventilation creates atmospheric conditions that rival the worst factories for toxic concentration of breathable poison. The minister who delivers your weekly dose of spiritual instruction speaks from an elevated pulpit that physically and symbolically separates him from the suffering masses below. His well-fed appearance and clean clothing marking him as a member of the comfortable classes who preach endurance to those experiencing hardships they've never personally encountered. His sermons focus on the virtue of poverty and the danger of worldly ambition, while he lives in comfort supported by donations from congregants who cannot afford adequate food or shelter. The theology preached from the pulpit transforms suffering into virtue and poverty into spiritual advantage, creating religious justification for social conditions that benefit the wealthy while oppressing the poor. Biblical verses about the meek inheriting the earth provide comfort to those whose earthly inheritance consists primarily of disease, malnutrition, and early death, while scriptural passages about the difficulty of rich men entering heaven reassure the poor that their misery serves divine purpose. Sunday schools operate as recruitment centers for child labor, teaching children to read just enough to follow simple instructions while emphasizing obedience, punctuality, and acceptance of social hierarchy. Religious education focuses on producing compliant workers rather than independent thinkers, with curriculum designed to create adults who view economic exploitation as divine will rather than human choice. Children learn that questioning authority represents sin, while accepting suffering demonstrates faith. The Church's missionary efforts abroad receive enthusiastic support and generous funding, while domestic poverty remains invisible to congregations more concerned with converting distant heathens than helping local sufferers. Collections for foreign missions gather substantial sums, while members of the same congregation starve in nearby tenements. The institutional focus on exotic charity, providing spiritual satisfaction without requiring acknowledgement of immediate social responsibility. Religious festivals transform into occasions for increased suffering as workers lose wages during mandatory observances while facing additional expenses for special foods and decorations they cannot afford. Christmas celebrations emphasize family gatherings and generous meals for people whose families have been separated by economic necessity and whose daily nutrition consists of whatever scraps they can afford or scavenge. The religious calendar creates additional financial pressure on those already struggling with basic survival. The doctrine of predestination provides theological justification for social stratification by suggesting that God has predetermined who will prosper and who will suffer, removing moral responsibility from the wealthy while encouraging the poor to accept their fate as divine will. This religious determinism discourages social reform while sanctifying existing power structures through scriptural authority that presents economic inequality as cosmic justice rather than human injustice. Women face particular religious oppression through doctrines that mandate submission to male authority while denying them voice in religious governance or theological interpretation. Biblical passages about feminine obedience provide justification for legal and social restrictions that prevent women from escaping abusive situations or achieving economic independence, while religious teachings about female spirituality emphasize sacrifice and suffering as particularly feminine virtues. The workhouse chapel represents the ultimate fusion of religious authority with social control, as paupers are forced to attend services that emphasize gratitude for institutional charity while discouraging any criticism of conditions that would horrify ancient slaves. Religious instruction in these facilities focuses on accepting degradation as divine punishment while viewing any improvement in circumstances as unearned blessing rather than basic human right. Questioning religious authority brings social ostracism and economic punishment as employers, landlords, and community members unite to punish those who express doubt about doctrines that justify their suffering. Skepticism becomes heresy, while intellectual independence is treated as moral failure, creating social pressure that enforces religious conformity through economic coercion rather than spiritual conviction. The contradiction between Christian teachings about love and charity and the reality of Christian society creates cognitive dissonance that must be resolved through theological gymnastics that explain why following Christ requires accepting unchristian treatment from Christian neighbors. Religious leaders perform elaborate intellectual contortions to reconcile gospel messages of justice with social systems that operate through systematic injustice, creating Christianity that serves power rather than challenging it. As you listen to another sermon about the spiritual benefits of material deprivation while your stomach contracts with hunger and your children cough with diseases that adequate nutrition might prevent, you begin to understand that religion in Victorian London serves to make suffering bearable rather than unnecessary, creating hope for better conditions in the next world while ensuring continued misery in this one through divine sanction for human indifference. Chapter 12. Women and Children Last. The moment you emerge from your mother's womb as a female child in Victorian London, your life expectancy drops dramatically while your legal rights disappear entirely, creating an existence where survival depends on male protection that may never come and legal recognition that will never arrive. Your gender marks you as property rather than person, a biological accident that condemns you to lives of service, suffering, and systematic oppression disguised as natural order and divine will. Your education, if any occurs at all, focuses on domestic skills designed to make you useful to future husbands rather than independent human beings capable of supporting yourselves through intellectual or economic achievement. Reading lessons emphasize religious texts that reinforce feminine submission, while arithmetic instruction covers only basic calculations needed for household management. Higher learning remains forbidden territory where female minds supposedly cannot venture without risking madness or moral corruption. Marriage represents your only socially acceptable career option, but the institution operates more like livestock sales than romantic unions, as fathers negotiate bride prices with prospective husbands who view wives as investments that should provide domestic labor, sexual availability, and male heirs in exchange for basic survival support. Your consent to these arrangements is neither required nor requested. Your preference is considered irrelevant to transactions that treat your body as commodity and your future as business opportunity. The wedding ceremony that legally transfers ownership of your person from father to husband includes vows of obedience that carry legal force, creating contractual obligations to submit to spousal authority in all matters, while receiving no corresponding promises of protection or support. Your new legal status as femme covert erases your individual identity under law, making you legally invisible while your husband assumes control over any property, income, or children you might possess or produce. Pregnancy arrives with terrifying regularity in the absence of reliable contraception, each conception beginning 9 months of increasing danger, culminating in childbirth that kills more women than war kills soldiers. Your swelling body receives no medical care beyond folk wisdom and superstition while you continue working until labor begins, often in factories or domestic situations where pregnancy is viewed as inconvenience rather than natural biological process requiring accommodation. The birthing process occurs without anesthesia, antiseptic procedures, or trained medical assistance, as male doctors consider obstetrics beneath their dignity while outlawing midwifery practices that might compete with their authority. You labor in agony while attendants pray for your survival, their religious focus reflecting the reality that divine intervention provides the only reliable protection against death in childbirth that claims women regardless of age, health, or social status. Surviving childbirth begins years of constant pregnancy and nursing that drain your body of nutrients while preventing recovery from previous deliveries, creating cycles of maternal depletion that age women prematurely while increasing mortality risks with each subsequent birth. Your children arrive annually or biannually until your reproductive system fails or death ends the biological marathon that defines female adult existence in Victorian society. Child mortality rates reach levels that would shock modern parents as disease, malnutrition, and industrial accidents claim young lives with casual regularity that forces emotional detachment as survival strategy. You learn not to name infants until they survive their first year, not to form deep attachments until children reach school age, and not to expect that any particular child will live to adulthood in an environment where death visits nurseries more often than birthday celebrations. Domestic violence represents accepted male prerogative rather than criminal behavior, as husbands possess legal authority to correct wives through physical punishment that can include beating, confinement, and sexual assault without legal consequence or social censure. Your bruises and broken bones provide evidence of masculine authority rather than criminal abuse, while your complaints about violent treatment mark you as bad wife rather than crime victim deserving protection. Economic dependency keeps you trapped in abusive relationships, as women cannot own property, sign contracts, or engage in most forms of employment that might provide independence from male control. Your labor, whether domestic or industrial, belongs legally to your husband, who receives any wages while you remain financially powerless regardless of your economic contributions to household survival. The few employment opportunities available to women involve dangerous work in textile mills, match factories, or domestic service where sexual exploitation accompanies economic exploitation, as employers expect physical compliance along with labor productivity. Your choices include starvation, prostitution, or industrial work that slowly kills you while providing wages insufficient for independent survival, creating illusions of choice where all options lead to suffering and early death. Prostitution becomes survival strategy for women abandoned by death or desertion of male providers. But the profession that offers economic opportunity also guarantees social ostracism, legal persecution, and health risks that include venereal disease, violence from customers, and pregnancy without support. Your desperation makes you vulnerable to exploitation by brothel operators, corrupt police, and customers who view your body as commodity rather than person deserving basic human consideration. Legal systems provide no protection for women facing violence, theft, or abandonment, as your testimony carries no weight in courts where female voices cannot be heard without male corroboration. Crimes against women receive minimal punishment, while crimes by women facing maximum penalties, creating justice systems that protect male interests while sacrificing female welfare to masculine convenience and social order. Your children face their own gender-specific horrors as boys enter industrial labor by age 6, while girls begin domestic service even younger, their small bodies providing cheap labor for factory owners and wealthy households that consume childhood for profit. Child labor laws remain non-existent, while social expectations demand that children contribute economically to family survival regardless of physical cost or developmental damage. As you navigate daily existence where your gender makes every challenge more difficult while providing no corresponding advantages, you realize that being born female in Victorian London represents life sentence to second-class citizenship, where survival depends on male benevolence that may never arrive, while legal equality remains an impossible dream reserved for future generations lucky enough to be born in more enlightened times. Chapter 13: Disease and Despair. The coughing that echoes through your tenement building never stops, a symphony of tubercular lungs expelling death into air already thick with industrial poison and human desperation. Each wet, rattling hack carries microscopic passengers seeking new hosts among neighbors who huddle together for warmth while unknowingly sharing diseases that will consume them slowly from within. Consumption, the romantic disease of poets and artists, reveals itself as brutal killer that drowns victims in their own blood while transforming vibrant humans into skeletal shadows of approaching death. Your own chest begins to tighten with the familiar burning sensation that signals another respiratory infection taking hold in lungs already damaged by months of breathing London's toxic atmosphere. The coal smoke and industrial chemicals have prepared your respiratory system perfectly for bacterial invasion, creating inflamed tissues where disease can establish colonies that spread throughout your body with mechanical efficiency. Each breath draws contaminated air deeper into organs designed for clean oxygen, but forced to process concentrated poison. Cholera arrives in London like an invisible army, spreading through water supplies and sewage systems with devastating precision that kills thousands before authorities acknowledge the epidemic's presence. The disease transforms healthy adults into corpses within hours, their bodies evacuating fluids so rapidly that skin turns blue while eyes sink into skulls that seem to shrink around dying brains. Entire neighborhoods empty as residents flee or perish, leaving behind communities of the dead where only rats remain to feast on abandoned corpses. The cholera victims you encounter in the streets move with shuffling gaits that betray internal battles already lost, their skin cold and clammy, while their eyes carry the distant look of people whose souls have begun departing bodies that can no longer sustain life. They collapse without warning, their bodies finally surrendering to bacterial invaders that have transformed intestines into factories, producing the watery discharge that signals impending death. Smallpox creates different horrors as victims develop pustules that cover every inch of skin, transforming human faces into unrecognizable masks of suppurating sores that burst and reform in cycles of agony that can last for weeks. The lucky ones die quickly, while survivors carry permanent scars that mark them as disease veterans, their pitted skins serving as lifetime reminders of battles fought against microscopic enemies that nearly claimed their lives. Typhoid fever burns through your body like slow fire, cooking your brain while your temperature climbs to levels that would be fatal if sustained for more than brief periods. Your mind begins to disconnect from reality as the bacteria attack your nervous system, creating hallucinations and delirium that make dying victims appear insane to observers who don't recognize the neurological symptoms of advanced infection. Family members restrain fevered patients who fight against invisible enemies, while their bodies consume themselves in futile attempts to generate heat that might kill the bacterial invaders. The industrial diseases that plague workers in London's factories create new categories of human suffering as bodies adapt poorly to chemical exposures never before encountered in human history. Match workers develop phossy jaw as phosphorus slowly dissolves the bones in their faces, creating horrifying deformities that eventually prove fatal when the poison reaches vital organs. Their faces literally rot away while they continue working, desperation overcoming vanity as disfigured workers choose slow death by employment over quick death by starvation. Lead poisoning from paint factories, water pipes, and industrial processes accumulates in nervous systems until workers develop tremors, mental confusion, and behavioral changes that mark advanced heavy metal toxicity. The sweet taste of lead makes contaminated water more palatable, while the metal slowly destroys brain tissue, creating generations of intellectually damaged children whose developmental problems reflect environmental poisoning rather than genetic limitations. Mercury exposure from hat making and medical treatments creates neurological damage that manifests as tremors, personality changes, and eventual madness that inspired the phrase "mad as a hatter" to describe industrial workers whose brains have been permanently altered by occupational chemical exposure. These workers shake constantly while their minds deteriorate, their condition providing dark humor for observers who don't recognize the industrial origin of their suffering. Rickets deforms the skeletons of children whose diets lack adequate nutrition and whose lives proceed without sufficient sunlight, creating generations of adults whose bones have grown incorrectly while their bodies adapted to malnutrition and urban living conditions. Their bowed legs and twisted spines mark them as products of industrial society that prioritizes profit over human development, creating physical evidence of social systems that sacrifice children's health for economic efficiency. Mental illness receives treatment through methods designed to break spirits rather than heal minds, as patients are confined in institutions where therapeutic interventions include ice baths, spinning chairs, and mechanical restraints that create additional trauma while failing to address underlying psychological problems. The distinction between treatment and torture becomes meaningless in asylums, where patients are punished for symptoms they cannot control, while their families pay substantial fees for care that guarantees permanent disability. Workplace accidents create epidemic levels of permanent disability as workers lose limbs, eyes, and lives to machinery operated without safety equipment or protective procedures. Factory owners view these casualties as acceptable costs of production, while workers accept maiming and death as unavoidable occupational hazards, creating normalization of industrial violence that treats human bodies as expendable components in profit-generating machinery. The diseases of poverty spread through overcrowded housing, where families share space with strangers while sanitary facilities remain inadequate for the number of people forced to use them. Scabies, lice, and other parasitic infections pass freely between residents, while more serious diseases find ideal conditions for transmission among populations weakened by malnutrition and environmental stress. Venereal diseases spread through populations where sexual education remains non-existent, while medical treatment involves mercury poisoning that often proves more damaging than the original infections. Syphilis destroys nervous systems, while gonorrhea causes blindness and sterility, creating cascading health problems that affect multiple generations as infected parents pass diseases to children who begin life already compromised by parental infections. As you feel another wave of fever washing through your body while listening to the coughs and moans of neighbors fighting their own battles against disease, you realize that illness in Victorian London is not an unfortunate accident, but an inevitable consequence of social systems designed to concentrate human suffering for economic benefit. Your body becomes a battlefield where multiple diseases compete for the privilege of killing you, while your environment continues supplying new infections faster than your immune system can mount defenses. Chapter 14: Violence and Vice. The darkness that settles over London each evening transforms familiar streets into hunting grounds where predators emerge from shadows to claim victims whose desperation makes them vulnerable to exploitation by those who view human suffering as business opportunity. Gas lamps create islands of flickering light separated by vast oceans of blackness, where violence breeds like bacteria in warm, moist conditions that favor criminal growth over lawful behavior. Your journey through nighttime streets becomes navigation exercise requiring constant vigilance as footsteps echo behind you with timing that suggests pursuit rather than coincidental travel. The sound of boots on cobblestones creates rhythmic percussion that marks the approach of danger, while your own breathing grows shallow, as fear constricts your chest and accelerates your heart rate beyond sustainable levels for extended periods of anxiety. Street gangs control territory with violence that rivals military campaigns in its organization and brutality, creating zones where their authority supersedes legal jurisdiction, while police avoid confrontations that might prove dangerous to officers whose safety matters more than citizen protection. These criminal organizations operate protection rackets that tax businesses for the privilege of remaining unburned while offering services that include debt collection, intimidation, and elimination of commercial competition through physical persuasion. The gin palaces that line every street glow with gaslight that attracts desperate customers like moths drawn to flames that will ultimately consume them. Their doors opening to reveal interiors where human misery dissolves in alcohol that provides temporary escape from conditions too horrible to endure without chemical assistance. The liquid courage sold in these establishments transforms mild-mannered workers into violent criminals, while reducing productive citizens to unemployable addicts whose dependency creates profitable customer relationships for tavern owners. Inside these drinking establishments, the air thick with tobacco smoke and human exhalation creates atmospheric conditions where violence erupts spontaneously as alcohol removes inhibitions, while crowded conditions ensure that minor disagreements escalate into major confrontations. Broken bottles become weapons while chairs serve as clubs in battles that leave floors slippery with blood and littered with teeth that reflect gaslight like scattered pearls in pools of crimson. Gambling dens operate in basement spaces where desperate men wager money they cannot afford to lose on games designed to ensure house victory, while providing illusions of potential wealth that keep players returning until they've lost everything, including their family's survival resources. The operators of these establishments understand that desperation creates better customers than hope, ensuring that winners receive just enough success to maintain addiction, while losers sink deeper into debt that can only be repaid through criminal activity. Opium houses offer chemical escape routes for customers whose lives have become unbearable through accumulated suffering that no amount of legal remedies can address. Their dim interiors filled with the sweet smoke of burning dreams, while addicts lie in stupors that provide temporary relief from conscious awareness of their circumstances. The drug transforms productive humans into living ghosts who exist only to serve their chemical masters, while their families watch helplessly as substances consume personalities along with bodies. Prostitution flourishes in neighborhoods where economic desperation drives women into sexual commerce that offers survival income, while guaranteeing exposure to violence, disease, and social ostracism that makes escape impossible even when women accumulate sufficient resources to attempt alternative employment. The customers who purchase these services view women as temporary property whose welfare matters less than sexual satisfaction, creating transactions where violence becomes entertainment while human dignity serves as currency. Child prostitution represents the ultimate corruption of innocence, as poverty forces families to sell children into sexual slavery that destroys young bodies, while creating psychological damage that lasts lifetimes for those who survive the physical trauma of adult predation. These transactions occur openly in markets where children are displayed like livestock, while customers negotiate prices for access to victims too young to understand the nature of their exploitation. Boxing matches and animal fighting provide entertainment for crowds who view violence as recreation, while wagering on outcomes that depend on inflicting maximum damage on participants who fight for prize money that represents their only hope of escaping poverty through physical prowess. These events celebrate brutality while providing socially acceptable outlets for sadistic impulses that might otherwise express themselves through criminal activity. The music halls that offer evening entertainment feature performances that blend legitimate artistry with criminal recruitment, as venues serve as meeting places where thieves, prostitutes, and other criminals coordinate activities while maintaining facades of respectability that provide cover for illegal enterprises. The audiences who attend these shows include both respectable citizens seeking entertainment and criminal elements planning activities that will victimize those same citizens after the curtain falls. Police corruption creates parallel justice systems where officers accept bribes to ignore criminal activity while participating in protection schemes that ensure certain criminals operate without interference in exchange for regular payments that supplement inadequate official salaries. The line between law enforcement and criminal organization becomes meaningless when officers profit more from ignoring crime than preventing it, creating conditions where justice depends on ability to pay rather than guilt or innocence. Private justice flourishes in neighborhoods where official law enforcement proves inadequate or corrupt, as residents organize vigilante groups that dispense punishment according to community standards rather than legal procedures. These informal courts operate according to prejudice and assumption, while their verdicts carry immediate execution through beatings, exile, or death administered by citizens who view themselves as protectors of social order. The criminal economy operates parallel to legitimate commerce, as stolen goods flow through networks of receivers who transform theft into retail, while providing markets for criminal activity that might otherwise lack economic incentive. These underground markets offer employment opportunities for those excluded from legitimate economy, while creating incentives for criminal behavior that provides better income than legal work for people whose social circumstances limit their employment options. As you navigate through streets where every shadow might conceal a threat, while every friendly face might mask criminal intent, you realize that violence in Victorian London is not an aberration, but a fundamental feature of social systems that create more criminals than they prevent, while ensuring that law and order serve primarily to protect those who need protection least, while abandoning those who need it most. Chapter 15. Early to bed, early to die. The candle flickering beside your bed casts dancing shadows on walls that have witnessed countless deaths. Its weak light, creating an atmosphere appropriate for the final chapters of lives cut short by social systems designed to consume human beings like fuel for industrial machinery. Your breathing grows more labored with each passing day as accumulated poison from air, water, and food slowly overwhelms bodily systems never designed to process the concentrated toxins that define existence in Victorian London. The average lifespan in your neighborhood hovers around 15 years for those unlucky enough to be born into the working classes, while wealthy residents of fashionable districts might expect to reach 40 before succumbing to diseases that respect social boundaries less than economic ones. Death comes early and often to populations weakened by malnutrition, environmental poison, and working conditions that treat human bodies as disposable components in profit-generating machinery. Your children, if they survive birth, face mortality rates that claim nearly half before their 5th birthday, as diseases, malnutrition, and industrial accidents harvest young lives with casual efficiency that makes funeral arrangements a routine expense for families already struggling with basic survival. The emotional protection parents develop against constant loss creates psychological numbing that makes bonding difficult, while ensuring that surviving children grow up understanding death as normal rather than tragic. Cholera sweeps through tenements like wildfire through dry grass, transforming healthy families into corpses within days, while survivors flee neighborhoods that become charnel houses where the living step carefully around bodies that accumulate faster than burial services can process them. The disease's rapid progression creates scenes of apocalyptic horror as entire buildings empty through death or desertion, leaving behind communities of the deceased where only scavengers remain to strip valuables from cooling corpses. Tuberculosis works more slowly, but just as thoroughly as the disease consumes lung tissue, while victims cough up increasing amounts of blood that stains clothing, bedding, and floors with evidence of internal destruction that continues relentlessly until death provides relief from slow suffocation. The consumptive cough becomes the soundtrack of urban life as infected residents spread disease through respiratory droplets that contaminate shared air in overcrowded living spaces. Industrial accidents claim workers daily as machinery designed without safety considerations operates in environments where human error results in immediate death or disfigurement that leads to slower demise through starvation and infection. Bodies are swept away quickly to avoid disrupting production schedules, while replacement workers step over bloodstains that mark the sites where previous employees met their fate serving industrial progress. The funeral industry operates with efficiency born of constant practice, as death provides reliable income for undertakers who have learned to process human remains like any other commodity requiring professional handling. Coffin makers work around the clock to meet demand from customers who die faster than burial plots can accommodate them, creating overcrowding problems that extend even to cemeteries where the dead compete for space with the newly deceased. Pauper burials represent the final indignity for those whose lives were spent in poverty, as bodies are stacked in mass graves without individual markers, while families who cannot afford proper funerals watch their loved ones disappear into anonymous holes that will soon accommodate dozens of other unclaimed corpses. The distinction between human and animal burial becomes meaningless when economic considerations determine disposal methods for the deceased. Child mortality reaches levels that would shock modern societies as parents learn to expect death rather than survival for their offspring, while developing emotional strategies that protect against constant grief through psychological numbing that makes mourning a luxury few can afford. The sight of small bodies being carried to burial grounds becomes so common that pedestrians no longer pause to acknowledge the passing of lives that never had opportunities to fully develop. Suicide rates climb as residents conclude that voluntary death offers preferable alternatives to continued existence in conditions that promise only increasing suffering without hope of improvement or escape. The Thames receives regular contributions of bodies whose owners chose drowning over starvation, while building tops provide launching points for those who prefer sudden impact to slow disease as methods of ending unbearable experiences. Medical knowledge offers little help to dying populations, as practitioners armed with medieval theories attempt to treat modern diseases through bloodletting, mercury poisoning, and other interventions that often hasten death rather than preventing it. The absence of effective treatments means that diagnosis becomes academic exercise, while patients die from curable conditions that will yield to future medical advances that arrive too late for current sufferers. The wealthy attempt to purchase immunity from mortality through private medical care and country retreats that remove them from urban pollution, but death ultimately claims all social classes while respecting economic boundaries only in timing rather than inevitability. Money buys more time, but cannot purchase eternal life, ensuring that even the most privileged eventually succumb to diseases that kill the poor more quickly, but just as certainly. Infectious diseases spread without regard for social status, as bacteria and viruses cross class boundaries more easily than humans navigate social hierarchies, creating democratic death that unites all Londoners in shared vulnerability to microscopic enemies that recognize no distinction between rich and poor when selecting victims for consumption. The Great Equalizer works overtime in Victorian London, where death visits all addresses with equal enthusiasm. Religious authorities offer comfort through promises of better conditions in afterlife while doing little to improve circumstances that guarantee early arrival at heavenly destinations. Their theological focus on eternal rewards, providing spiritual justification for temporal suffering that serves economic interests more than divine purposes. Death becomes release rather than tragedy in societies where living conditions make continued existence more punishment than privilege. As your own breathing becomes more difficult, while fever consumes your strength and appetite abandons your wasting body, you realize that death in Victorian London is not an unfortunate accident, but an inevitable conclusion to lives designed to be brief, brutal, and profitable for those who survive by consuming the vitality of those who don't. Your candle burns lower while your life follows its example, both flames destined to flicker and fade in darkness that claims all light eventually. Chapter 16. Why You Wouldn't Have Made It. The soft comfort of your modern bed, with its clean sheets and filtered air, feels impossibly luxurious as you consider the reality of spending even a single day in Victorian London's toxic embrace. Your contemporary expectations of safety, cleanliness, and basic human dignity would have marked you for immediate destruction in an environment where survival required adaptations that no modern person possesses, immunities that no current generation has developed, and resignation to suffering that contemporary minds cannot comprehend. Your first breath of Victorian air would have sent you into respiratory distress, as lungs accustomed to relatively clean oxygen attempted to process atmosphere thick with coal smoke, industrial chemicals, and organic decay that created breathing conditions worse than modern hazardous waste sites. The toxic cocktail that Londoners inhale daily would trigger immediate medical emergencies in bodies unprepared for chemical assault that locals had learned to tolerate through generations of gradual poisoning. The water you would instinctively reach for when thirst struck would have delivered rapid death through cholera, typhoid, or other waterborne diseases that modern sanitation has eliminated from developed societies. Your immune system, trained to fight contemporary pathogens, would have proved helpless against bacterial strains that flourished in Victorian sewage, while your digestive system, accustomed to processed and preserved foods, would have rebelled violently against raw contamination that defined every liquid source in the city. Your modern dietary expectations would have encountered food so adulterated with toxic substances that each meal would have constituted deliberate poisoning by current standards. The lead, arsenic, mercury, and industrial chemicals that permeated Victorian cuisine would have accumulated in your organs at rates that guaranteed rapid system failure, while your stomach, accustomed to regulated and inspected nutrition, would have rejected substances that contemporary law classifies as environmental hazards rather than edible materials. The clothing available to dress your body would have exposed you to contact poisons that modern textile regulations prohibit, while the dyes and chemicals used in fabric manufacturing would have caused immediate skin reactions in people whose dermatological experience excludes industrial toxins. Your modern skin, soft from soap and protected by clean clothing, would have erupted in chemical burns and infections when exposed to garments that served as wearable poison delivery systems. The work expected of your body would have broken your modern physique within days, as muscles conditioned by contemporary exercise attempted to perform industrial labor that treated human beings as expendable machinery. Your bones, strengthened by adequate nutrition and medical care, would have fractured under stresses that Victorian workers endured through necessity, while your joints, accustomed to ergonomic support, would have failed when subjected to repetitive motions designed to maximize productivity rather than preserve human health. The diseases that circulated freely through Victorian populations would have found your immune system completely unprepared for bacterial and viral strains that disappeared from modern societies through vaccination and sanitation programs. Your body's defenses, trained to fight contemporary pathogens, would have collapsed when confronted with tuberculosis, smallpox, cholera, and other killers that modern medicine has relegated to historical curiosities rather than daily threats. The psychological stress of constant exposure to death, violence, and suffering would have overwhelmed mental health resources that contemporary society provides through support systems unknown in Victorian times. Your emotional expectations, shaped by societies that acknowledge human dignity and individual worth, would have shattered when confronted with social systems that treated most people as expendable components in economic machinery designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. The legal system that would have governed your Victorian existence operated according to principles that modern societies reject as fundamentally unjust, creating conditions where your contemporary understanding of rights and protections would have provided no defense against authorities who viewed justice as tool for maintaining social order rather than protecting individual welfare. Your modern legal expectations would have proved worse than useless in courts designed to process human lives according to economic rather than moral considerations. The medical treatment available for your inevitable illnesses would have hastened death rather than promoting recovery, as practitioners armed with theories that modern science has thoroughly debunked would have subjected your body to interventions that contemporary medicine classifies as torture rather than therapy. Your modern medical expectations would have encountered healthcare systems designed to profit from suffering rather than alleviate it through effective treatment. The social expectations that would have defined your Victorian existence would have crushed personalities shaped by contemporary values of individual expression and personal autonomy. Your modern psychological development, nurtured by societies that encourage independent thinking and creative expression, would have wilted under social pressures designed to create compliant workers rather than fulfilled human beings. Yet somehow, impossibly, millions of people survived these conditions long enough to create the reforms that eventually transformed Victorian hell into modern civilization. Their resilience, born of desperation and sustained by hope for future generations, created the foundation upon which contemporary comfort rests. Their suffering, documented in statistics that modern minds struggle to believe, purchased the progress that allows current populations to live with dignity, health, and reasonable expectations of safety. The contrast between Victorian suffering and modern comfort should inspire gratitude rather than complacency as contemporary societies face their own challenges that require the same courage and determination that eventually liberated London from its industrial nightmare. The history of Victorian London serves as a reminder that human progress results from acknowledging problems rather than ignoring them, from demanding justice rather than accepting suffering, and from believing that tomorrow can be better than today. As you settle into sleep surrounded by clean air, pure water, and safe shelter, spare a thought for those who died to create the world you inhabit, whose sacrifice purchased the comfort you enjoy, and whose memory demands that you protect the progress they made possible through their endurance of conditions that would have killed you within hours of arrival in their toxic, beautiful, brutal city.